So do you know what this opening is that I'm playing?
Negative.
This is called the Caro-Kann defense. So one of the main things you want to do is you want to play very much in the center here. So you brought your 2 pawns out, and by pushing my pawn on c6 and d5, I'm trying to play in the center as well to contest the center.
Yeah, I would probably do this, but I already feel like I'm kind of on the defense, even though I'm white. Is that fine?
Not really. I mean, what you want to do, I think, since you're relatively new to the game, is that you want to develop your pieces and look to see if anything is like unprotected, where you could lose, your opponent could capture, say, a pawn and you don't have any way to recapture it, or if you could, like, your opponent's attacking a knight. So the 3 moves that you've played so far are perfect. Okay. It's actually very, very good so far. Okay, very good. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, this is theory that's been known for hundreds of years. So you're doing very well so far.
I would probably play this, so if we take, I get kind of middle board control again.
Yeah, not a bad move. Now one thing I would say is normally what you want to do is you don't really want to push the pawn to the left of your king, like this f pawn from the f2 square, very early in the game. And normally the reason you don't want to do that is because there are some threats that can occur on the dark squares. Like you see this h4 square.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna capture your knight. And now I'm gonna play this. And so if you think for a second, I mentioned that h4 square. So before you play a move, do you see maybe a way that I can put something on that square?
Yeah, you can put the queen on there.
Right. Now there's that would actually be very bad for you. Can you figure out why that would be bad? If it was my move, I put my queen on the square.
Yeah, because I could block it, but then you just take in the middle.
Yeah, so when I move the queen there, I check your king, so I attack your king, but I also attack your pawn, and so that's a double attack. So you would actually be unable to protect the pawn on the e4 square.
So I should have played bishop d3 earlier.
No, what you did with f3 was fine. So now think about think about it this way. You don't want my queen to move that square, right? But I'm also at the same time right now attacking your pawn on this d4 square where your queen guards the pawn twice. So I'm attacking with my queen and my pawn. Is there a way that you can move a piece to protect this pawn?
Like this?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, normally when I say that, it takes a little bit of time. It's just like I don't even finish the sentence and you see it right away.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No. I mean, like that's great. I mean, normally that's not how it goes.
I think I'm definitely mind controlling myself a bit because I'm playing as you. But I think typically I would just take here with the knight, and then if you take with the queen,
whoa. So think for a second. Remember now, if you take with the knight. Do I have
then I give up the
yeah, you get that square again, so I have that same trick.
I see. What would I do then?
So I think since you're so new, the basic things I would think, and it's kind of in this order, is see if I have any like way of capturing a piece on the next move with, like, say my pawn, or let's say I can move this queen to this h4 square. But beyond that, I think you want to think about developing, or whether you can capture any of my pieces.
Yeah, I just don't know where to develop. I probably move one of the bishops, but I have no idea where.
So really there are two things you can do here. You can either so remember how I said you couldn't take this pawn with your knight?
Yeah.
Is there another way that you could capture it?
With my queen, yeah.
Would that be good or not?
I just heard it's not great to bring out the queen too early.
Yeah, so normally that would be true. In this case, though, if you capture with the queen, the only real option I have is to trade the queens.
Yeah.
So you could do that, but another idea is just to develop. So if you don't capture the pawn, which bishop would you develop here?
That's a good question. I would say probably like this to block your castling.
So that's good. Now one thing I would say is normally when, especially when you're newer to the game, castling to this side, the queen side as we call it, because it's to the left of your queen. Most of the time that doesn't happen. Usually players castle their king the other way, so it would go over 2 squares from like where your king is right now. Ju, and you know how to castle, right?
Sorry,
do you know how how to castle with your king?
Yeah, I do.
So normally you would go 2 squares.
I usually castle on the side where I have the most pieces to protect that side, but I'm not really sure which.
So okay, so in this situation it's a little bit different, but okay, I'm just gonna move my bishop here. So I'm not going to castle to that side. I'm going to try to castle to the other, to my king side, to my left or your right.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, I would definitely take. Because now I feel like I have a good amount of pieces out.
Right. No, so far this is.
You're right. Makes me question myself.
No, so far it's perfect though. This is absolutely perfect. So now that you've brought your bishop and your knight out, I guess the first question is there anything that I'm attacking with any of my pieces where I can capture on the next move?
No.
Okay. So now that we established that I can't do that, you basically want to bring the rooks into the game. Now normally the easiest way to do that would be to castle your king.
Yeah.
So you basically have 2 options. You have to decide which way do you want to move your king to castle it.
Yeah, well, I either move the bishop and then castle on the right next turn, or I just castle now.
Right. So both of them are completely fine.
Okay. I'll just castle here, I guess. Though I have lost quite a few games, you just having my king kind of stuck behind my pawns and getting checkmated like that.
Don't worry about the time, by the way. We'll add more time, so don't worry about that. Okay, so now most of your pieces you've developed, your rook is on this open D. It's on this D file. You see on the light square where next to your king, and you see how if you move your knight out of the way, you'll have all these squares for the rook to potentially capture a piece or move down somewhere.
Yeah, I would probably just move it to the middle.
Yeah. Okay.
So now, something like this.
Yeah. So you saw that if I capture your knight with my bishop, your rook captures back.
Yeah.
Okay. So what is my idea here?
You have multiple attacks on the knight.
Right. So I'm gonna, if I take your knight, I have my bishop and my rook that are threatening to capture your knight, and you're only defending it with a rook.
Yeah. So I'm either moving the C2 pawn up, or I'm blocking with the E4 pawn. But I'm not sure what's better. Yeah. Let me think. I would probably do this.
So now again, there's nothing. I'm not attacking any of your forces. Like the rook can capture your knight, but your rook guards your knight.
Yeah.
So now what you want to do is try to think of a way to attack towards where my king is. So for example, in this position, you see how you have this bishop on the light square, which is on C4. It's on this diagonal down towards where my king is, and I have this pawn in front of it. So very oftentimes in situations like this where you develop your piece and you realize nothing is under attack, you want to try or nothing can be captured where you won't be able to recapture back. You want to see if there's some way that you can attack towards where my king is. So this bishop is really good on this c4 square. Can you maybe think of a way to maybe attack this pawn in front of my king with another piece?
Yeah,
perhaps.
I thought of something. I'll just try it, and then you can tell me how it goes.
Now that's not great. Now the reason that's not a great move is because I can just recapture your bishop. So what I meant by that was that basically you want to put another piece so that you can try to capture the pawn, but it's a defended piece.
One more time, that last part.
So normally when you try to win material or create checkmates, you need to do it with 2 of your pieces, not with 1 piece. You see how you took the pawn with your bishop here?
Yeah.
And I can just capture it back. So the way that you create attacks usually is with a combination of 2 of your pieces, whether it's like a bishop and a rook, a queen and a bishop, whatever it is. You need to use 2 of your pieces rather than just capturing like this. But anyway, we'll keep going. So
yeah, this was the play I saw, but it doesn't really do anything because you just move back.
Right, and now you've given up a bishop for 1 pawn. But it's not bad, by the way, to be clear. It's not bad. It's still pretty good that you had a move in mind after that, because normally when someone is like, I just capture this pawn, I just win the game. But the fact that you took and then you actually had an idea of pushing the pawn is very good. Now, if you count the material here, since I started without 2 of my knights, you're still ahead by 1 knight.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Right, and that's actually something in general. So in general, when you think about a game, if you're ahead by a lot of material like you are here, normally you're happy with trading down like rooks, a rook for a rook, for example, a bishop for a bishop, a bishop for a knight, and so forth, because you're always ahead, and so that means I have 1 less of the piece to attack with. And attacking your king with pawns is very, very hard. So normally you need like the rooks, the bishops, the knights. Those are the pieces that you need to that can go down the board quickly and attack towards your king.
I don't really see a great place to go.
Yeah, it's very hard sort of in this position. That's why I was saying, since the end game it's a little bit different without the queens on the board, you probably you want to try to find some way to exchange, make a trade of some of these pieces, like whether it's rooks or whether it's the bishops. You want to try to make some kind of an exchange. Apparently some of my chat says in League trading is better for the side that's losing because the end game is balanced, but in chess it's not quite like that. So if you make like these exchanges, you're actually always going to be ahead at the end.
Oh, sorry, you cut out.
I heard cut out?
In League it's better to trade, and then I
okay, never mind. That's fine. Yeah. Okay, so try to find a way to you can't really push any of your forces forward. So is there a way that you can try to maybe make an exchange where we trade some rooks?
1 second. I can't.
Sure.
I have a 2 PC setup and my mouse is not moving over on
no worries.
Screen I have chess on. Okay, I'm good now. I mean, I can move the knight so that we're kind of staring each other down. I just don't feel like I have a good place to put it. Possibly backwards?
That's the best move, probably. So, okay, so now I'm going to trade the rooks.
I guess I would take with the rook.
Yeah, that's fine. So at this point, rooks normally are very good when they have like this open sort of line or this file. You see how there's nothing on the same line as your rook. So is there a move that you can make where you can threaten to capture something where I won't be able to recapture it, or you just get it basically for free?
On the 7, is that called a rank?
Yeah, we call it ranks in chess. Yeah.
I was gonna play knight d4.
That's also a good move. Yeah, both moves are fine.
Okay, but then I'm kind of blocking my rook as well, so.
Right. So why do you think that I suggested this move? I mean, I didn't suggest it, but I was kind of trying to imply that it's a good move.
Well, I can just kind of start eating up your pawns on the left.
Right, and I don't actually have a way to defend them. If I push this pawn, which your rook is currently targeting on this light square, then, like, say I push it forward 1 square or 2 squares, what would your next move be?
I would just eat a7.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna do this.
Trading seems favorable for me.
It's kind of okay, although
because we traded
right now this is actually a good trade in a sense. I mean, you gave a bishop and a knight for my bishop. The reason that it's actually a good trade is because let's see if you have an idea what your next move will be.
Yeah. Well, I have a few different moves, but I'm not sure what is best.
So remember, at this point in the game, since we're near the end, there's very limited material on the board. You generally will be looking the same as always to see if there's anything that you can capture.
Alright, I'll just make a move.
Okay.
I didn't know which one to capture.
The one you capture is actually right, because I can't protect both of my pawns. If you captured the other way, I could have moved my rook to protect my pawn. But here you keep an attack on 2 of the pawns on both sides.
Yeah, that makes sense. Guess I just keep going.
Okay. So now we're really far in this endgame. You see, both of us have 1 rook on the board, but you have 3 more pawns. And normally, when you reach this sort of endgame part of the endgame phase of chess, what you want to do is normally you need to use your pawns to try and basically create a distraction or make a queen. So you know that when a pawn gets to the end of the board, it basically promotes to a better piece. So if we think about it this way, you see how you have these 2 pawns near my king on these 2 dark squares, H2 and G3.
I was going to push that for a check.
Right, now you could do that. However, you can't really get either of these pawns to the end of the board because I have a king and a pawn in front of them.
Yeah.
But what you do have is on the other side, you have pawns that basically, like, you see this pawn that's, I guess, behind or in front of your rook on this A2 square. You see how I have nothing in the way? You have your rook, which is in the way, but I have nothing, like I have no forces that are directly in front of that pawn. So basically it's this clear path to the end of the board. So it's what we call a passed pawn, where there's nothing that can really stop the pawn from going down the board.
So I just want to start making a run, basically.
If you can, yes.
If I can.
But why can't
I've never actually had time to think in the end game because I feel like I'm always low on time, so I'm just moving when I'm playing actual games. So
I would say most games that you play are probably not going to get to a situation like this where it's this balanced. Normally there will be some kind of checkmate much earlier. But if you do get to end games, what I would say here is if you just think about this pawn, it will take 1, 2, 3, 4. If you could get the pawn to the end of the board, it would take 5 moves. Whereas I have, it's going to take me a lot of time to capture your pawns and then get my own pawn that's on this h5 square to the end of the board.
So I basically have to calculate how much time it would take for you to do that.
Okay, so yeah, let's just do a. So if I wanted to,
I can yeah. Should I just play?
Yeah, go ahead. Right. So now, how do you think that I could capture these two pawns?
These two pawns?
Sorry, these two pawns. I mean the pawns on the dark squares. The pawns on h2 and g3.
You would just push your rook down.
Okay, so if I move my rook down, I can still only capture one though. So if I move my rook all the way to the light square, it would take me 1, and then it would take me 2 to capture the pawn. And then I have to move the rook over again to capture your other pawn. That's 4 moves already, whereas your pawn is it'll take 4 moves before it gets to end the board. And if the pawn becomes a queen, then it's the end of the game.
I mean, if you move your pawn, it's faster, but then I just take it and you can never.
Right, I just lose it. Like the only way that I can kind of come back in this game is if I can get my own pawn or one of my pawns to the end of the board. So okay, let me see what I can do.
Yeah, I don't know what I do.
This position actually, if you know some fundamentals about this endgame part with the rook and the pawn both on the light square and the pawn next to it, which is on the dark square, you can win this game no matter what I do. So I'm gonna go here. Okay, let's see. Go here.
I see. What do you mean now?
Right, so my king wants to capture both of these pawns.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna take this pawn in this position. Where would you move? Where are you considering? You want this pawn to get to the end of the board, right?
Yeah.
So you probably need to move your rook somewhere. Would you move your rook? I guess for you that would be up, or would you move the rook over to the side?
I'd probably move it to c7.
It's a good move. That's a very good move.
Though I'm never actually going to take this pawn. But...
Well, normally what you want to do is you want to push this pawn to the end of the board. The pawn on the a6. This light square pawn is 2 squares from the end of the board. So I'm going to push my pawn here. Okay. I'm going to go here. So now you see how you can't push the pawn and make a queen because I'll capture it?
Yeah.
And you can't really, you'd love to move your rook to the square c8, the last rank, but you can't do that either because then I'll just take the pawn. So your rook is kind of tied to your pawn, and your pawn can't go forward here.
Yeah. Do I just start killing off your material, or is it a draw in that case?
I mean, you're winning multiple ways, but just for instructional purposes, I would probably say you should take the pawn here.
Yeah.
So I will. Okay, I will take. Okay, so now we've reached a situation where you have a rook and 2 pawns, and I have 1 rook. Now, let's see if we can figure this out. So again, since we're near the end of the game, if it's 1 rook versus 1 rook, it's a draw, but you have 2 pawns. So again, what would the idea be? Or I mean, how do you want to try to win the game?
I just have to move them up slowly, protecting.
Right. So if you basically get a pawn to the end of the board, you win the game.
Yeah.
So you had the right idea. You said push the pawns up slowly and win the game. Okay.
I don't know if I should push them 2 there, but
it doesn't really matter. This is winning. I just want to see. Now you want to use the pawns, but remember again, this is very deep in the game, so you can also use your king as well.
Yeah. I was gonna move my king next, probably.
Okay.
This is starting to make me nervous.
Yeah, this actually is not the best move. But I'll show you at the end of the game. It'll be easier afterwards to explain.
I see.
Okay. So now once again think about this position. Where am I moving my rook? Let's just say it's my move here. Where would I move my rook if it was my move? Would I capture the pawn?
Mate?
Oh yeah, no, rook a1 is checkmate. Yeah, exactly. No, I was expecting you to say I would take the pawn, but no, rook a1 is a checkmate. So like here you would like to push the pawn, but if you push the pawn I go over and it's checkmate, so you can't push your pawn forward.
Yeah.
So
I was going to check your king, but
on which square?
Sure C5.
Wow. Okay. No, I mean that's actually that's the best move. Like in this position, this is a forced win. By the way, to be clear, this is a known endgame where it's a forced win if you know the technique.
But I shouldn't have lost any pawns, right?
Correct. Okay. Yeah, rook c5 is the best move.
Okay.
So the reason this is the best move is because since we're very deep in this endgame, now I'm gonna move my king. You see how my king can't come back? The rook actually prevents it from ever coming close to your pawn. So now you should be able to find a way to win this game with your king and your pawn.
I should be able to, yeah. I feel like it's safer if I move my king first.
Right. Okay, that's
slower.
fine. Okay, so I'm just gonna wait though. So how are you? Can you really push your pawn forward anymore or not?
Well, that actually was not very helpful, yeah.
Okay, so now I'm gonna move my king. So if you were to push your pawn forward, I capture your rook. So you don't want to push the pawn. Now remember how I said that your rook sort of cuts my king off here. The king can't come onto the rank next, or the file, sorry, next to your pawn.
Yeah, so I just need to make space.
Okay. Okay.
This is the end of slide 1 of this record. Please now turn it over for seconds.
What do I do now?
You're doing everything correctly, by the way. That's why I'm actually not saying anything. So you can still do the same pattern, at least for one more sequence of moves.
Yeah, just moving up.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how I actually get it on that final square.
Right. Okay, so now I'm gonna move my rook here. And this is just so you know, this is a position that's known as called the Lucena position. So it's a forced victory, and it was discovered in 1497. Now I don't expect you to know this, but you see how my king is it's one file away from your pawn. You have this pawn on the light square on b7. I have the king that's basically it's one file away. It can't get over because your rook prevents it, right? The rook covers all the squares on this C file.
I mean, this is my only move, is it not?
It's one of the moves. I mean, there are many different moves. So I'm just gonna move my king here because actually, so now what you want to do is there a way that you can try to force my king to go over to that would be your right over to the E file. Is there some way that you can use your rook and your king to try and force the king over? So you can't move your king over. And if you move the rook back, you're just checking my king. So I'll tell you the next move. So move the rook to c4. Yeah, go put the rook on c4.
Yeah.
Okay. So it looks like a random move, but again, let's just say it was your move here. Do you have a way to force my king over or not?
Yeah, if I check you, you have to move right now.
Right. It's like it's actually it's not checkmate, but it's the same pattern with the rook and the king, where when you check, my king has to go over one row. And you see how right now your king can't move, right? Because my rook covers the 2 squares on one side, and my king covers the 2 squares on the other side. So I'm just gonna move my king. And now, exactly, perfect. Now let's say I were to go to this light square, the c6 square. Your king can move then, right?
Yeah, I would just move him over right once, or to c8, sorry.
Exactly, and then you push the pawn, you make a queen, and that's the end of the game.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be the end of the game.
Well, okay, yeah, I mean,
in technical terms, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you'd win the rook versus king, but all right. So I'm gonna go this way. So that's okay, but okay, so we'll do this again. So that was okay. That wasn't the best move. So now you have to go over again, right?
Right. See.
So let's do this again. Do you have a better move with your king?
With my king.
You only have 2 squares that you can move your king to here.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember why it's different. Oh, I see how it's different.
Okay, and so when I check you,
I move here.
Right. Okay, now again, I'm gonna check you here, and this is where you don't want to move the king forward, because then I'm just gonna check your king. Now that's it's closed. So I'm just gonna check you and go back to that same square on b6. Okay.
Oh man.
So now I'm gonna check you, and when you went to that dark square, your pawn was free to be captured. I could have taken your pawn.
Oh, okay.
So you have the right idea.
So I just have to stay close.
Right. Okay. So this is correct. So now I'm gonna check you again. Now you don't want to go back to the same square, because I'll check you, and I'll just keep checking your king for the whole game, and it'll be a draw.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I'm so confused right now. All right, this is so. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so now you have a queen versus king. So I told you to figure out how to do this checkmate.
All right, let me try.
Okay.
This is going to take a while.
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean,
Oh man, it really shouldn't be hard, but it feels difficult.
that was not even, that didn't even seem remotely difficult, honestly. The way that you did that, that was actually that was perfect technique. So basically, let me try to create an analysis board to show you this, and then we can start another game. Second. Okay.
Do I just go on the live?
It's fine. You should see something in the bottom right hand corner. I just invited you to a board.
Yep.
Okay. So all right. So okay. So now I'm just making moves. You can also make moves on this board, but basically, I never thought in a million years that we'd be playing a game and I'd be showing you this end game, because this is like one of the, this is a very advanced concept. Basically, what happens is when you get to the start of this end game, where your king is in front of the pawn. Let me go back for a second. Let me just go all the way back. Let me just go back to this position. Okay, so you see this position after I take your pawn here. If you were to say make a if you were to say make a, why can't I make it move? 1 second. If you were to play rook to h4, what's going on? I can't seem to make the moves on this board. Anyway, whatever. Let's just go. Let's just see this position after you move the rook back to c4 and move 49. Let me just reload this. There must be something wrong with this. Okay. Now make a move. All right. Well, I don't know why I can't seem to make moves. There's some glitch in the position, but okay. So you see this position, how with your king on this position right here with your king on b8 and my king on d7. At this point, what you have to do is you have to find some way to bring your king back to c7 and b6.
Yeah, while protecting my pawn at the same time, right?
Right, because if you can't force my king away, there's no way to remove my rook, because the rook is protecting the two squares to your right, I believe, of where the king is.
Yep.
And right now my king is covering the other two squares where your king will come out. So what you have to do is you make this check. Sorry, let me see. Yeah. So when you make this check, you force the king over one square. So now you see how the king is cut off. It can't. It's two squares, 2 files away from the pawn on b7. Whereas before it was only 1 file. So what you want to do is you want to use the king and the rook to force the king over, and then once the king is over 2, you can build what we call a bridge here, which is basically you zigzag with your king and put your rook on b4, as you did, because what happens is when I check, I have to keep checking, right? Because otherwise you make a queen. And then you did. Okay, you did this
after a few blunders. Yeah.
No, but it's fine. But the fact that you found this is actually kind of amazing, because again, I have to check, because otherwise you make a queen. And now if I don't trade the rooks, again, you make a queen with your pawn. So okay, let's go again. Let's do another game. That was actually perfect. Like the way you did that end game and then the queen and king conversion was incredible. I don't actually know why you're rating 600, if I'm being honest. That's probably the most this is probably the most impressive thing that I've seen in all the collaborations I've done. I've never seen someone like get into one of these end games and then find the right idea and then also make a perfect checkmate with the king and the queen.
Oh, thanks.
Okay.
I've been watching some of your lessons with XQC and some other people, so I think you explained how to do the queen mate in one of those.
Yes, that is true. But he still made a couple of stalemates. You did the checkmate on your first try.
I have no idea what to play as black, but
so I would say the opening isn't super important as long as you have a basic setup of developing your piece. There's no opening setup that is that is like I would say like better really. As long as you have some way of developing your pieces at the start, that's good enough. So okay, so again you want to develop your pieces. So by pieces I mean things that like the bishops, the knights, the rooks, and the queens, not so much the pawns. Okay, it's a good move. Very good. And so if I try to capture your pawn, your knight protects it. So I'm gonna just push my pawn here. Okay, now this is an okay move, but normally like the reason I pushed my pawn was specifically because I didn't want you to push your pawn forward. So it's fine. You'll see in a second the reason though. So your next move is pretty obvious, right?
I force you to move, right? But I guess this pawn is
okay. So I'm gonna trade the queens first.
I see. Is it important to take with the knight here so that I can castle later, or should I just take with the...
it's very important to actually take with the knight here.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm gonna go here. So right now I'm attacking your pawn twice, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, this guy's pretty toast.
But it's not.
It's not. By just bringing out my pawn. I see. He's dead, but I'll get a favorable trade.
Yeah, I mean, if I take the pawn with my knight or my bishop, you're gonna get a knight or a bishop for 2 pawns. And if you think about it, pawns can be very useful, like in the end game where they can go straight down the board and promote to something that's better than what they are. But normally speaking, the bishops and the knights can get around the board quicker than pawns. Okay, I'm gonna castle.
I don't know if this is right, but I would probably play it this kind of move. Just make you move.
So now you want to kind of develop your pieces.
Yeah. Wow, your king is well protected.
Yeah, so the thing is, you should be aware of what I'm doing as well, and I'm not really attacking any of your pieces, but I'm developing. So I'm bringing I castle my king out of the middle of the board, and I'm bringing my knight out. So yeah, you kind of what you want to do is you want to develop your piece and get your king out of the center of the board if you can.
I want to move this knight. I just don't know where, because I don't want to castle. I need to stop saying right and left, but I don't really know what they call it.
So what I would say is, you see how where your king is, and normally there's a queen next to it. So if you castle your king to the side where the queen was, that would be queenside castling. If you castle it to the side, basically,
I don't want to do kingside castle though, right? Because my defense structures.
Both castles are fine. Both moves are fine. But what's funny to me is like you're doubting yourself with your moves, but every single move like has been pretty good. In this game, every move has been great.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. If I didn't know who you were and I was playing, I actually would think that you're smurfing, that you're much better than you are, because you're playing extremely well. This is very, very good. Okay.
Oh wait, I can take that one.
Mm-hmm.
Not all is doomed.
Yeah. So you should try to be aware of that. Yeah. You should try to be aware. I mean, in this case, I mean it's fine, but normally try to be aware, like when something of mine is starting to capture on your piece.
Yeah.
So this is good. Okay. I'm gonna go.
What was the best way to defend the fork you were going for? I think it's called fork, right?
Yeah, no, if I get my knights to that light square, that would be a fork. Probably what you could have done is you could have just developed your dark square bishop to a better square. But now I'm gonna so you see. So
yeah,
you see how I have this light square bishop right now on this G2 square. You see how your pawns, they kind of prevent this bishop from attacking anything. Like I would really like to take this pawn here on B7 next to your rook, but the pawns are very much in the way. So I'm gonna play this move, which normally it's not, it wouldn't be a great move, but the reason why do I want to play this move? Or rather, what am I threatening? First of all, what will my next move be?
If my board is like this, you want to trade, and then you're pressuring the B7 pawn, like you said.
Right. So but let's count. So right now you have these two pawns. You have a pawn on this E4 square, and you have a pawn and a knight that protect this pawn. But I'm attacking it with the pawn on F3, the bishop on G2, and also the knight on C3. So you actually don't really have a choice here in a sense.
Sorry, I'm a bit lost.
Okay, it's fine. So right now I'm just take the pawn. I'll actually, after the game I'll create a board and I'll show you.
Okay. Should I take the pawn here?
Yeah.
I see.
Okay, so I'm gonna take the bishop.
Do that.
So now what am I threatening here? Something under attack?
The B7 pawn.
Right. So now, before you make a move, what are the ways that you see where you can, I guess, prevent me from capturing this pawn and getting nothing in return?
Sorry, one more time.
Okay, so right now I'm threatening to take this pawn, and you would just be behind by one pawn. It's just a pawn that's not protected. So how could you prevent me from doing this? I don't make the move right away. I'll just add more time. But what are the ways that you can prevent me from capturing this pawn?
I would probably castle.
Yeah, I wanted to know what the ways you would defend would be, because I didn't think you would come to that conclusion right away, and then you just do it. So this is a great move because you protect the pawn, but you also get your king out of the center of the board, and now your rook is also on this open D file as well.
All right. I think I would trade. I don't know if my logic is bad, but I feel like I get more board control because you have to move backwards.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of things I can do. I just don't know which one is winning or if any of them are winning.
I mean, nothing is really winning per se, but your bishop is not great. This darks for bishop versus my bishop, because if you were to move the bishop away, potentially I could capture a pawn on this a7 square.
Oh yeah, this guy's hanging. I did not realize that.
In this case, it kind of is. It's not super. It actually probably isn't, but I'll show that after the game. So so here I probably would suggest that you trade the bishops. Okay. So now when you think about this position, your bishop is pretty good, I think, on this light square. It's targeting down towards this pawn on a2, and it also protects your pawn on this square next to it, this f5 square.
But why is pressuring the a2 pawn?
Well, it's right now it's not, because my rook could capture, but I mean if I were to move my rook away. I just mean it's well placed in general, because it keeps an eye on this pawn. You're not threatening to take this pawn right here, but it keeps an eye on that pawn. And it also protects this pawn. Your knight also is pretty decently placed. I don't know if there's a better square for your knight necessarily, but it's on a good square. So what is the one piece here that doesn't look like it's on a good square?
This guy?
Yeah.
I would probably do something like this. Why are you moving your king?
Okay. Okay. Now this move it isn't the best move. And I'm actually going to show you why. So you move the knights. You want to basically exchange the knights and the bishops here and get into an endgame, right?
Yeah.
So if I capture with my knight, you capture back with your bishop. I capture with my bishop, and then your rook takes at the end, and it's just an even trade. We both only have rooks on the board. The problem with this move is that I can take this way.
I don't know what the difference is, but
this is the difference. My knight can capture your pawn.
I see. Oh, this doesn't look so good all of a sudden.
Okay, so now you see, like, it's very hard kind of to attack here with your rook and your bishop, but try to think of ways where you can maybe create double attacks, or you can threaten to win some of my pawns or my knight perhaps.
I feel like if I move my bishop, I'm losing out, but maybe there's something I'm missing.
Where would you move your bishop?
To e4, but then I see you taking, and then I take, but then you take again, so you're up one pawn. So I was going to move the pawn to h5.
Okay, so I want you to move your bishop. Okay, I want you to move your bishop to e6. The other light square, which attacks the knight. So this is like, this is very strange, because basically when I told you to find a way to attack, that is the move that I originally wanted you to play, was bishop e4, because it attacked the knight and the pawn at the same time. But you correctly saw that I captured 2 pawns in return. So now I'm gonna play the correct move. I'm not gonna blunder here. But why do you think I can't capture this pawn on h6 on this dark square?
Well, you can't capture.
Okay,
on
I'll
h6.
play it. Just I want to see if you can figure it out.
Oh, I see. He's trapped.
Okay. Okay.
I would probably do something like this.
Okay.
This is getting tricky.
You're playing. I couldn't play better myself by this position, so you played every move correctly.
I would probably retreat.
Okay, that's not a bad move. I'm gonna go here. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm.
These end games are so hard.
Yeah, this is pretty advanced already.
What would I do? What would I do?
So one way to think about this is that your rook is very active. You see how your rook is on the same rank as my pawns. It's attacking both the pawns. If I ever move my rook away, you can capture the pawns.
Mm-hmm.
So your rook is very active, whereas the white rook is very passive because it's stuck protecting its pawn on this b2 square.
I see. So I could just start pushing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, now see, this is actually a mistake. And I mean, like, it's pretty advanced as to why it's a mistake. You actually should have not taken the pawn because, well, maybe it's still winning, but we'll see. We'll see. Yeah, let's see.
Yeah, I see. That kind of sucks. But I would probably just take and hope for the best.
Okay. So what would your next move be if I don't move? If it was your move here, what would your next move be?
I would fork you with the rook.
Yeah, you'd move it down with the check on with the king and the rook, and then when I capture, you take back, and your pawns are connected. Now this position is actually a draw with correct play.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually not. You're ahead by 2 pawns right here. But the thing is, your pawns are split. You see how they're not connected? There's this one file in between.
Yeah, let me look at what I took.
Yeah, that's why actually when you took this pawn and moved 38, it was not the correct decision.
Okay.
But I'll show you afterwards. I'll pull it up afterwards.
Yeah. If we trade rooks, is it a draw?
No, because you have 2 pawns. If you have a king and 1 pawn versus a king, normally that's a draw. If you have 2 pawns, though, it's almost always winning. If it's just a king and 2 pawns against a king, it's almost always winning. Okay. Yeah, this is great. You're seeing the same idea as before. You see how my king is, there's this one row in between. The rook cuts this king off, so my king can't go over and get to your pawn on this a4 square. Okay. Now that's a blunder.
Yeah. I should have just played it slow and stayed in information. Oh, I see why.
Yeah, because now you actually lost the rook.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I was thinking that right before I moved it, though. I see.
Yeah, and now we're gonna end up with a king and a rook against the king, which is a forced checkmate.
Run, little pawn, run. Oh man, yeah, I realized playing the drills that if you're playing against a player who is really smart, even if they're really down pieces, it's hard to win.
Yeah, of course. Because normally,
if you're at my level. Yeah.
Well, I would play a different style. I'd play a very tricky kind of different style, which is different than what I've done. So I guess yeah. All right, I'll resign this game just so that I can click this. Okay. 1 second. Let me just load this. Okay, let me just invite you to this board. 1 second. Okay, so you should see an invite.
Yeah.
Okay.
My analysis says one player was winning but gave it away.
Yeah, so it was a very good game. So, all right. So do you see this board?
Yeah.
Okay, so the reason that I played this pawn forward was because if I were to castle here, you could push this pawn, and I have to move my knight, and like after say knight e1 f5, you have these 3 pawns, and you would finish your development very easily. Like you would move your knight, your bishop, and castle your king. So for example, let's just say I play a move like this, go here. Say I try to develop, you'd move your bishop, and your next move is to castle your king. And my bishop is actually really bad on this light square, because normally what I would like in a perfect world, I'm just gonna make some random moves, is I would like this open diagonal for my bishop where it's attacking. But like in this position, it's closed and your pawns kind of wall it in. This bishop doesn't have really any scope on this diagonal. So that's why I actually played pawn to d3, and now you pushed. I captured. And do you see a difference here between this position and the previous position with your pawns? Like if we go see this position versus say this position. Your pawn is supported by these 2 pawns as well as this knight.
Yeah, it's obviously much stronger.
So it's much stronger, whereas when I push my pawn, or whoops, sorry, when I push my pawn, your pawn is much weaker here. You can only defend it with a pawn and a knight. So now I took. Now the reason taking with the knight was correct instead of the king is because I can do the same thing. And what happens if you push your pawn to the square?
I get forked.
Yeah, I go knight f7 and I win your rook in the corner.
Yeah.
So that's why taking like this was correct, because now you take with the knight and there's no longer this threat and you still protect your pawn. And so this was all pretty good.
I wasn't thinking about having to take backwards with the knight because I thought I would have a favorable board position even if I pushed that pawn, but
right. So like that's
really
one thing that's kind of tricky because it varies from game to game, but sometimes actually retreating, it's not that big of a deal. Sometimes you actually need to do that. You can't just keep pushing your pieces forward and attacking. So like this was one of those cases where it was better to take with the knight, and then this is all pretty standard. Right, and you moved your rook here. Now you were worried about me moving my knight here and forking your rook and your bishop. That being said, let's just say I'm just gonna move the knight randomly here. If I move my knight, you can still move your rook away, and so it is a fork of the rook and the bishop. But if I capture your bishop, you just recapture. So it's not that big of a deal in the same way that, let's say, instead of bishop you had a queen here or a rook here. So it would be it's not that big of a deal. So you don't actually need to move the rook, but if you're afraid of this, what you could do is you could keep developing. Move this bishop and then just castle your king. Castle your king. Because if I move the knight here, you just move the rook now, and your next move will be to move your king and attack the knight. And the reason that this is important is because like this knight looks really good, but I have nothing to support it. So even though the knight has been moving and trying to attack your rook here, eventually you're just going to kick the knight to where it has to go backwards. It can't just keep this position. So like, I'm just gonna make a couple moves hypothetically just to show an example. Now let's say we reach a position like this. Do you know what this is called when I have like a pawn that protects the knight and none of your pawns can attack the knight?
No.
This is called an outpost, and what that means is that you can obviously move a piece like a knight to make an exchange, but you cannot remove this knight from the square because this pawn always supports it. Now in a perfect world, you would like for this pawn on this dark square h6 to go back one and attack the knight. But you see how you push these pawns, both this f pawn and this h pawn here? You can never get rid of this knight. The only way to get rid of the knight is to trade it. So these outposts where a knight is supported by like one pawn, where it can never really be removed from a square, is really important. But if we go back to this position right here, this knight, there's no support for it. So you're just going to move your king and attack the knight. My knight is just going to have to retreat and go backwards. So it looks really cool to be jumping all over the board with my knight, but I also lose a lot of time.
But you're moving the same piece like 3 times.
Right, and exactly.
I'm developing all kinds of pieces.
Right, it's perfect. So yeah, so you did this, we traded. Right, so this was the other point. When I pushed this pawn, the reason I did it is because, again, you see this bishop, it doesn't really have an open diagonal. It's not attacking this pawn because the pawn protects it. And maybe I can move the bishop here, but again, your bishop is just protecting the pawn. So this bishop is really passive here. It doesn't really have diagonals. And your bishop, for example, on this, both the dark and the light square bishops, both these bishops, they have open diagonals. You see how there are no pawns in front of them?
Yeah.
So they can go.
That's why I was
diagonals.
not going to trade, because doesn't that open up more space for you? So why should I trade?
Right. So you don't really you'd prefer not to trade, but the problem is you can't really avoid it, because right now I'm attacking this pawn with my pawn, my bishop, and my knight. So I have three things that are attacking it, and you're only defending it with a pawn and with a knight. So you really would prefer not to trade, but in this case you kind of have to. So that's why, I mean, you have to, and it's just the nature of the game. Sometimes, like, you would prefer not to, but of course,
what if I move the bishop to d5?
Okay, so you move the bishop to d5. You're right. So now you guard the pawn with three things: your bishop, your pawn, and your knight. And I'm still attacking it with three things: my knight, my pawn, and my bishop. But the problem with moving the bishop here is that I can actually take your bishop. You take back, and now I can take. And when you take back, I take.
I see.
And you're behind by one pawn.
Okay.
So that's why in this case you kind of have to do this.
I have a hard time with this when there's some games in my elo where we're both just developing forever, and I never know when.
Right. So like, I guess what I would say is in a position like, I guess in these games it's more difficult because we played this game without queens on the board. Without queens, it's a lot harder to have straightforward ideas. But what you want to think about is, right now there's only one open file here. You see this D file. There's only one open file. So you would like to get your rooks on the open file, because rooks are always best when there's an open file. That's just how they're most powerful on the open files, just because of how they move. Whereas, like, you see this rook on g8 here, it doesn't really do a whole lot. It's on the square, but there's really nowhere that it's going. So what I would say is you're trying to figure, if you see open files, especially when there are not queens on the board, by the way, it's really important to put your rooks on these open files, first of all. But then secondly, what you want to do as well is you want to put your bishops on the most ideal squares where they have the most threats on diagonal. So this is actually very similar to the first game, in that in this position you could have put the bishop on this diagonal and it's attacking my king. Normally the bishops, when they get on the c5 or c4 square and the king is castled to the same side, it's really dangerous.
Sorry, that's not what I did. I did something else.
Well, you did in the other order, which is completely fine too, by the way.
Okay.
And then you did this again. You took the open file with your rook, and the reason that I moved my I didn't move my rook here was because now you could, what could you do?
What could I do? Oh, then I would just take the free pawn.
Right. So first you could actually trade the rooks. So if you take the pawn, well, actually, if you take the pawn here, I want to see if you can figure this out. So I think there's a concept, I don't know if you're familiar with it, which is called removing a defender. So you see how your king is protecting your rook, so it's a defender here.
Yeah.
Is there a way that I can remove the defender?
With your rook, of course, yeah.
Well, yes, I can play rook takes rook, but then you just take back, and it's an even trade. It's one rook for one rook.
Yep. Oh, I see. So you take with the bishop.
Right, and then when you take the bishop.
Yeah, I see.
And now you give up a bishop, but you get a rook in return.
Yeah.
So this is a pretty advanced trick. It's not something. But also, what I would say as well is, even if
these are the things I never see. Is that you kind of picked that up doing puzzles and these kinds of things?
Yeah, when you do puzzles, it's like you see that. That's why, like, when I was mentioning that list of those puzzles, certain themes are really important, because once you see them enough in the puzzles, then you'll start seeing them in the actual games. But also as well, I could trade the rooks and take this pawn. So that's why what you would want to do here is trade first, because when you take, first of all, there's no idea with this pawn, But secondly,
Yeah.
my knight is backwards. It's not attacking this pawn anymore.
I didn't see any of those things though, but I just thought if I make you move backwards, it should be favorable for me.
Right. Now I realize there's one other thing that I want to show you from this middle part. So in this position, I said if you move the bishop back, you'd lose this pawn in the corner on this a7 square. And now this is actually a very famous thing. It happened in a world championship match between Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky, where Bobby Fischer took a pawn because he thought it was a free pawn on the side of the board. But this is very dangerous because now what can happen is, even though I won one pawn, you can now push a pawn here.
Yeah.
And what's happened to my bishop?
Trapped.
Yes. And so I'm just gonna say move my king here. You can't move your king over yet to capture this bishop. So how would you get your king over to capture the bishop? Very good. Yeah, there are a couple ways, but this is one of them, and you move the king over and the bishop is lost. It's just stuck on this a7 square.
Oh, I see.
So this is, I mean, it's not really a common trick, but you do have to be mindful sometimes where you see a pawn that's free where your bishop can capture on the side of the board, because if you can push a pawn like this where it's supported, the bishop gets stuck here. It can never come back into the game.
Yeah.
So it's just another cool little trick. And what was I gonna say? Oh yeah, I was gonna mention this endgame somewhere in here. Right, so everything you did in this endgame was pretty good. I mean, like these 5 moves were perfect. This was all good. Right, so we reached this position, and I played this pawn push. Now, one thing that's important, especially in endgames, is when you have like what we call like pawn chains, where you have pawns that are connected like this. Right now, you have these 3 pawns here. Actually, a perfect pawn chain would be this, by the way. If you could get the pawns like this where they all support each other, this is what we call a pawn chain. But in general, your pawns, they're connected here. They aren't split up. So when I push my pawn here by capturing, you sort of you break them up where they become split. So even if you get all 3, you have these 3 pawns, it's much harder to get them to the end of the board than it would be if, say, you had this pawn somewhere on like b5, for example, because then you could just run your pawn straight down the board.
Yep.
So that's why this is actually a better move.
I see.
Because now I can't, if I move my rook away, let's say I move my rook here, what's your move?
I'm trying not to overthink it.
It's an endgame, so it's like an endgame, so it's just like what was the problem here with my rook? I mean, getting back to the basics.
He was defending the pawn, so.
Exactly. So I can't really move my rook in this position, so it's kind of stuck to the pawn. So what you can actually do here is I'd probably move my king, and now where would you move your rook? Well, be careful. I have a pawn here that protects that square.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. I thought you were moving up. I couldn't tell you. I either move up to c1 or I move down. I'm not entirely sure.
Well, actually, what you should do is move to sideways. And the reason you should move sideways again is because this rook is tied down to this pawn forever. If I move the rook, I lose the pawn.
Yeah,
so when I move the king back, you can actually just move the rook over. And again, my rook actually, in this case, it has no moves because the pawns cover all the squares. And so if I move my king up, you can actually just move your king, just say here, king here, and you move your king over. And again, this pawn is always, the rook is always stuck to the pawn. So I end up having to move the king backwards, and then you just bring your king up. And let's say I move my king here, you make a check, I go over, and you go here. And again, it's the same situation where my king can't go forward. I don't want to move my rooks, I lose the pawn. And if I move my king back, you can now go king here. And if it was your move and you're black, what would your next move be?
Yeah, so eventually I'm going to get your rook, or I'm going to get him to move and get the pawn.
Right, but if it's your move here and you're black, what would your next move be?
C4, I hope.
Right, of course. It's a fork. It's a fork. You fork the king and the rook.
Yeah.
And you win the rook. And if I move my king over...
if you move your king over... I'm trying to think about why it's any different, but I don't think it is.
It's not. It's not. There's two solutions, but yeah, I basically... Yeah. You can push the pawn, but actually, let's see if what is the other solution besides pushing the pawn? There's a way you can also win this game sort of on the spot, or win. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you see it right away. Yeah. So that's actually why when we get back to the start, in some of these end games, really this only applies to end games, I would say. When you have your pawns sort of connected like this, you generally don't want to split the pawns the way that you did in the game. But let me just go for it. There's just one more thing that I want to point out. So in this position, you see how your rook cuts the king off from coming over, and your pawn supports the rook. Like, your rook has complete control of this because the pawn supports it.
Yeah, I should have just stayed in formation and slowly moved up.
So okay, right. So how would you try to move forward and move up?
How would I try to move forward?
So remember, you want to try to get this pawn to the end of the board, but right now you can't push it because then you lose your rook.
Yeah, I'd probably move the king.
So now I'm gonna check. Okay, so that's one move, but actually remember how before you could put the king in front of the pawn and march it all the way to the end of the board and make a queen in a previous game?
Yeah, I just have to do that same thing.
Well, you would like to do it, but there's one problem here. You see how the king is on the very edge of the board? There's no, you can't go to the there's nowhere to the right. The king can only go one way. You don't have two files because it's on the very edge of the board. So in this case, it's different for that exact reason. You really you wish you had that extra file off the board where the king could go, but in this case, you don't have that. So like, even if I just make random moves, let me just make some random moves. Let me just see here. You get to this position. You see how you really would like to move the king over, then push the pawn?
Yeah.
You can't do that because there's no extra file. This is the end of the board. So that's why in this case you actually can't win the game. And it's only because of that. And I'll show you another example here. Let's just say we get.
Even if I move my king left like I did.
Okay, so let's say we get to this position. Okay, so right now I have one rook and you again have a rook and a pawn, like in the previous example, the previous game. So again, my king is one file away from this pawn, right? So how would you try to remove it?
Remove the king?
Well, you see, remember in the previous example, the endgame, you wanted the king as far away from the pawn as possible when it was at the end of the board.
That is a good question. Because I can't check you, then I lose. Or maybe I'm missing it.
So remember, you want to take files. You want to get the king as many files away from this pawn as you possibly can.
Then I have to do this, don't I?
Right, but I still remain. There's only this one file separating the king from this pawn.
But if I move left, don't you take b3 and then?
Okay, so if you go check, my king can go here. And so now you move your king over one square. And this looks, I mean, I can just capture the pawn and make a draw, right? It's not a draw though. I want you to see if you can figure out why it's not a draw.
Oh, okay. It is not a draw.
So rook versus rook, traditionally it would be a drawn game because players have the same amount of material.
Mm-hmm.
So did you see a move maybe right now? Like my rook is very vulnerable because my king supports the rook, and your king is attacking it. So if I had to move my king away, you'd be able to just take the rook with your king.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
Oh, that didn't really help.
Yeah, and you're ahead by a rook. Now,
yeah.
whether you can make the checkmate is one thing, but that's why I can't actually move my king up, because you have this idea. So it's kind of a cool concept.
Oh man, do you mind if I run to the bathroom?
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks, Bear. Bye.
Yeah, so you guys, what I'm gonna say is, like, I'm not trying to show like rook and pawn end games. Like I'm really trying not to, but the only reason that I'm doing this in this game is because in the first game it was the same theme. That's the only reason I'm doing this. Having said that, it is pretty nuts that he's seeing this. I don't know, like, I don't know if it's if he played chess a lot when he was younger or what it is, because this is pretty insane. Like, considering his rating is 600, like the way that he did the rook versus pawn, seeing rook b4, or the way that he did the king and queen mate, like, I mean, is very unusual. I don't know if, I mean, I'm kind of wondering if it's just he hasn't played chess in many years exactly, because it feels to me like he has. He definitely has some experience, because yeah, he does not look like a beginner. I mean, compared to like XQC, for example, I mean, not even XQC, compared to anyone that I've done a collab with, it's not comparable. No, he said he's been doing chess.com drills, you guys, but I showed him chess.com drills last night. This is not like, it's not like he's been doing drills like for weeks on end. I showed him drills last night. Like I showed him where to do the drills last night. So it's not like, I mean, it's not like he's been grinding drills for like weeks or months on end. Because yeah, like, I mean, maybe he's rusty, or maybe it's just he's been playing games that go too fast, or what it is. But yeah, it's not, I have not done a collab with anyone where it's been like this. I will say that, like, literally, like, I mean, Charlie was good, he picked up stuff pretty quickly, but Charlie was not, I mean, it was not, Charlie's probably most comparable, I would say, of people that I've done stuff with. Voyboy is different because Voyboy was already very strong, and he played quite a lot as a child. But yeah, this is, I mean, this is, I was really confused. Yeah, Gripix as well, but Gripix, you could tell there was a lot of experience. Like, that's not the experience, is my understanding, in terms of Bjergsen, is that yeah. All right. So everyone's been asking me, what is like your experience with chess?
I think I told you, but I played a lot as a kid. I don't know how old.
But, right, but you said you were playing like against like one of these machines.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, one of these things that probably most of chat isn't aware that they even existed. But like, did you actually play in,
built into the board?
Did you actually play in like tournaments, or was it just was that just it?
No, that's it. I just played against my brother and that board, really. And then a year ago, I played maybe 30 games of chess, but it didn't really stick. And then I started playing again like a week ago.
Wow. Yeah, because what I was gonna say is, I think honestly, like the way you're understanding, I mean, maybe it's just you're picking up the concepts really quickly, but most of this stuff is stuff that a beginner would never pick up. Like, it would take a long time to pick this up. It's just like, it's pretty insane what you're saying.
Thanks, man.
No,
I've been watching a good amount of videos, and obviously I've been watching your stream quite a bit. It's very helpful.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how to put this. It's like, because I feel like maybe it's just the way you retain information, because honestly, like, there are a lot of people who would say the exact same thing, where they watch videos, but it just the way that it sticks, like, I mean, like, it's crazy. I really don't know what to say. It's just so, I'm just shocked. I really am. Because even these games, like, sure, these like are very advanced concepts, but generally speaking, like the way that you saw moving the king, moving the pawn down the board, like, I would You'd have to be an intermediate player normally to pick up any of this, so it's very impressive, very impressive. So do you want to do one more game?
Sure, yeah.
Okay,
if you don't mind.
Yeah. So you also, I remember you were saying last night that you that your stuff, or not stuff, I'm sorry, I'm thinking about myself, that your father had your father had played chess.
Yeah, I talked to him about it today actually, because I said I was going to be on your stream. And I told him I'd send him the video later for him to watch. But yeah, he played a lot of chess when he was a teenager. But he, at least the way I've been told the story about my aunts and my grandma, is that he kind of went to one. He was doing really well in his city for his age, but then he went to one kind of state tournament and lost, and I think he just kind of quit. Yeah, he's not a super competitive guy by nature, so. I think he just really enjoyed winning and being better than everyone else, and he had a kind of natural affinity for it, maybe.
Right. I guess that makes some sense. Yeah,
I never played against him much though, because he would just either he would crush me or he would go easy on me, and I don't like when I could. Of course, I know you're gonna go easy on me, but it doesn't feel great when you feel like someone is purposely going easy on you.
Right, exactly.
But it's also not fun getting crushed either. That's why you want similar level of competition.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, that makes sense. All right, so okay, you'll start with white again. Yeah,
I don't really have an opening, but I just
I think the main thing, like I was saying, is as long as you have some basic plan for developing the pieces, that's what matters the most. It's not about a specific set of openings. If you just have a basic plan of 5 to 10 moves, just a very basic smooth idea of how you're developing, getting your king out of the board, that's a very good starting point.
On stream, I heard you talking about that usually people match the e4 because otherwise I can do this and control the center squares. Is that a good move for me here?
So the reason that normally players will push their pawn actually one square forward to e5 to like mirror your first move is because at the top levels normally space matters a lot, and even though this opening I'm playing, this French defense, is a playable opening, white has more space in the center of the board with the two pawns being pushed forward 2 squares versus my pawns being pushed forward 1 square and 2 squares. And at the top levels, normally if you have more space, the best players in the world will be able to convert the position and win. So that's why normally you try to mirror it or play symmetrical.
Okay,
good move.
I don't know if I should take because your pawn is kind of useless there anyway. And if I take, you force me back, but maybe that's
you should actually take. And again, this is something that's important. So yeah, just go ahead and take the pawn. When you say I'm going to force you back, you mean I'm going to push my pawn forward? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So what I said before with the first game was that it's very dangerous pushing this pawn, whether it's the pawn next to your king on f2 or my pawn on f7. It's very early pushing that pawn early in the game because it opens up a diagonal. So like for you, it's the queen on d1 that can go to h5. So it's actually very dangerous to do that in the opening if the queens are on the board. If queens aren't on the board, sometimes you can do it, but with queens on the board, it's very risky when you push the pawn that's right next to your king.
Don't you just block that with g6?
Right. So yeah, so I was actually making a general point about queen h5, but you're right. If you were to check right away, I block. Now the reason that pushing the pawn would be bad actually is that you would retreat the knight, but then your bishop would come to the c4 square and the pawn would be very weak on e6. So you see how my pawn right now on f7, it supports the pawn in front of my king on e6. If I push that pawn, you can move your bishop to like say the c4 square, and the pawn is under attack. Right now the pawns support each other, but it would be a very big weakness if I push my pawn forward because the pawn no longer would support this pawn in front of my king.
I see. Okay.
So you see how you brought your knight out, and it's actually in front of this pawn. You brought your knight out, it's in front of the pawn on this f2 square. Normally it's the same thing. Like, you'll almost always bring your knight out in front of that pawn. You don't want to push that pawn early in the game.
So if I take your knight, you're gonna have stacked pawns, but you have an open file for your rook. Is that better for you or better for me?
Well, actually, okay, so now if you work backwards, I didn't move my knight right away. I moved my other knight first. So if I really wanted to have my pawns stacked on top of each other, I would have just moved the knight right away.
Okay. So it's almost always unfavorable to have the double pawns.
Almost always, yeah. I would say, especially as a beginner or intermediate, even, it's almost always it's not good to have pawns stacked on top of each other. Now, having said that, you don't really want to go backwards here with your knight because, I mean, you want to develop. Since your king is still in the center of the board, normally you want to develop your pieces. So really the question kind of here is what to do with your knight. And normally at the start of the game, you don't really want to go backwards with it.
I probably would just defend it with my bishop. What I'm saying. Yeah,
it's good. So do you know what a pin is?
This one?
Okay. Okay. The timing of that was
yeah. I don't know if it's castle time or if I try for some spicy attack, but I don't think it would work on
first, as I said, you always want to be aware of which of your pieces are defended or undefended, which I can capture and you won't be able to recapture. You'll just lose. So like in this position, you made a pin with your bishop, because if I were to capture your bishop with my knight, my queen's under attack. But I broke the pin because I put the bishop in the way of the of your bishop and my queen. So I'm actually threatening to take your bishop next move.
Yeah, I would have missed that if you didn't tell me. Do I just take?
That's completely fine. Yeah, so we're gonna reach a middle game position pretty soon with queens on the board. So this is where ideas are important. But remember, you've developed your bishops, your knights. So really, the last piece is the last thing you haven't developed yet is your king. So you do want to castle your king, but you don't want to lose material in the process. So basically, you have to figure out: do you want to capture the knight, or do you want to say move your other bishop, or what your idea is here?
I would try something like this.
Okay. So be careful here. Be careful. So figure out the calculation. So what are the possible moves that you can play? So if you were to capture my knight,
either I take the bishop or I take the knight.
So what happens if you capture the knight here?
You can just take my bishop, but then I would trade with the... I see. Then you get that with the queen. So I pretty much have to take the bishop.
Very good.
Yeah, I would also blunder this one if you didn't tell me. These are hard
Right.
things to see.
Yeah, it's not easy to see. I think the easiest way to look at it is to think about just try to count. You know, when a piece is on a square, how many things do you have defending it? Like in that case, you only had the knight, which was defending the bishop. So try to count the number that both sides have.
All right. I would just take.
Okay, so now I'm gonna play a really bad move. Again, trying to play for some of the themes that I've mentioned before. So I'm attacking your queen. So you have to move your queen, obviously.
Yeah. This is a really bad move.
It's actually a terrible move what I just played.
Okay.
But you're not gonna understand right away. But so you have to move your queen, obviously.
I want to move it here. I just don't think it's really gonna accomplish that much.
That's okay. I'll not trade in this case. I'll move my rook here. But now think about concepts. So there was a certain concept that I mentioned after the second game involving a knight.
I assume you mean this one? He's just not really doing anything here. I mean, he's holding some squares, I guess, but...
Right, but this is actually really good, and the reason that it's really good is because how do I get rid of your knight?
You don't?
Right, and so what is this called?
Something post?
Yeah, outpost. Outpost.
Outpost.
Yeah. So the thing is, in this case, I can't remove the knight because my pawns cannot get to one of the squares which attack the knight, and my bishop is on the opposite color. It's on the light squares, and it's a dark square knight. So in this position, this knight is really, really good, and that was the mistake, is that I pushed the pawn. So if I had never pushed the pawn, the square would not have been the square. The square would not have been available in the same way.
Yeah, I see.
And so if you go through the process, there's nothing that I'm really attacking here. I'm not attacking or threatening to capture any of your pieces. So what you want to do at this sort of stage is you want to bring all your pieces to sort of the best possible squares they can attack. Now remember, you've moved your queen around quite a bit, so it's on a completely fine square. Your knight is on a great square. You don't want to move that knight. So what sort of isn't in the game yet?
I think the A1 rook to D1 or the F1 rook to E1, but I don't know which.
Yeah, they're both completely fine. They're both good moves.
Okay. Because if I move the A1 rook to E1, I'm just blocking the other one.
Right.
Never gonna get in the game.
Yeah, the only time that you would want to put your rook there is if there was no pawn on the F line. If the rook had an open file there, but it doesn't. So the rooks here belong exactly in the center of the board. On these sort of what we call half open files, because there are pieces on the files, but they're sort of halfway open.
I feel like I'm running out of brain power.
You're doing great. This is great. So we think about where your pieces are. You brought your rooks in the center of the board. Your knight is on a good square. Your queen is on a good square. So you really would like to try and attack now. So your rooks aren't on good squares, but your rooks can access a lot of squares from a certain rank where they like right now they can only go forwards, right?
Yeah.
So is there somewhere where
it
they
just
can
feels
go?
it feels very slow, but I guess it's kind of what I have to do.
Yeah, it is kind of slow, but also at the same time I'm not really attacking either. Like your all your pawn in the center is defended and I'm not really attacking. If I had a straightforward idea where I was sort of attacking, then it would make some sense. But in very oftentimes you also have to be like, you have to plan a strategy of a couple of moves to try and do attack or trying to so let's say it's your move here. Where could you move your rook to if it's your move to make a very serious threat? And by that I mean your e3 rook, the rook that's on the dark squares.
To h3.
Yeah, and what would that threaten?
The queen h7.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very good. So that's the thing, is sometimes it isn't like a one move attack for like a checkmate, but it's like if once you see a couple of these, this is why puzzles are so important. Once you see some puzzles where you see these ideas of like checkmates with like a queen and a rook on this H file, it starts to you get internalized, and then you'll start seeing these ideas as opposed to worrying about the move by move situation. Okay, so I'm just gonna play here.
Probably do this.
Right, that's perfect, because now like what the reason I pushed the pawn, I mean just a fundamental reason, was I wanted to remove the defender of the knight. But when I take, so which way would you recapture?
I think I should probably take with actually I don't know. If I take with the rook, then you're forced to recapture, and then I just get the pawn back again.
In a way, yes, but at the same time, remember how your knight is so good here?
Yeah.
If you take with
but
the pawn,
either way, I get to have the pawn there. It just depends if I want the rooks in the game or out of the game, right?
True. Both moves are actually very good here.
But I did hear you say if you're playing against a better player, you should not.
Well, the reason is because if you think about the concept of where your knight is right now, it's always supported by something. Like when you have this pawn here, the knight will just remain here forever. It can't really be removed. Okay, so now I'm gonna try to get tricky here. I'm gonna play this move.
I want to just take, but I'm trying to figure out what trap you set for me. But if I was playing in a game, I would just take this immediately. So.
What does this?
Do you want me to...
Yeah, go ahead.
The rook. I would take the rook immediately. Do you want me to do it, or do you want me to try to think it through?
Try to think it through.
Oh,
like...
okay. Thank God I didn't do that. Would I do this?
It's completely fine too, yeah.
Guess I'd move back. I don't know.
Okay, so now we'll go here.
You're really spicing this game up. Uh-huh.
Ooh.
That's an ooh, huh?
See, you lost your knight here.
Yeah, I should have moved the pawn up, huh?
No. Actually, no. So do you see what happens if you take my queen here?
Yeah, it's mate, right?
Right. So that's what we call a back rank checkmate, where the king cannot come up.
Yeah, that's why I should have moved one of the pawns in front of the king, right? To open up some space.
If you could have earlier, yeah, you would have. Yeah.
Should I have done it on this previous move, or?
It was reasonable, yeah. But I mean, mainly where your queen was made it difficult. 'Cause there's a specific formation where normally you push the pawn where your queen is right now. To this h3 square. Normally you push that pawn from the h2 square to h3, so you create the square for the king on the side of the board. Okay, good move.
I don't feel like I can do a whole lot, but...
It's a difficult position.
Uh-huh. Alright, I'll try not to take 10 minutes to think about each move. Oh, we're back, huh?
Yeah.
we're back here again. Yeah, I keep forgetting about that. Oh, yeah, we just end up trading queens now, though. I don't lose, right? Oh, this is bad. This is not good. I see. I still lose here, huh?
Yeah, this is what we call a back rank checkmate, which is why normally, like, if you're playing, you almost always want to be aware of that and push one of your pawns in front of the king forward. Usually the pawn in h2 to h3, so you have a square for the king.
Yeah. Damn, I was thinking about that. It was just gonna block the kind of queen rook play that we talked about earlier.
Right, so right. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of in between, but I think in general when you're playing, you should be very aware of this checkmate pattern with your king getting stuck on this back row behind the pawns, because it does happen quite frequently.
Yeah. Last night I had a game where I was really down on material, but I got that checkmate against someone.
Right, and that's why also, like, if you, now that you like the back rank checkmate, if you do like puzzles and you just select that theme and you do that over and over, it really becomes natural where you see it all the time. And it's really important. So, like, yeah, I mean, in general, your understanding is really good. Like, you're picking things up really fast, and it's hard to believe that your rating is only 600. Maybe that's just because you're so unfamiliar with the game, or maybe you're like not confident enough, but overall your understanding is really good. This is by far and away the biggest shock I've had in terms of doing, like, just showing someone chess, because like the way that that first game you saw some of those ideas, and the way that you execute the king and queen versus the king was just like insane. It was really brilliant.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, hopefully I could get a little higher elo if I just play some more games. I haven't played a ton, so
yeah, I think like 643, like, based on what you've shown, I mean, putting it together in a game is different, of course, but there's almost no way that your rating should be like 600. Like, literally no way. It should be like 1000 for sure. So if you play more games, the rating will go up. Like, there's no doubt about that. 600 is not what your strength is, not even close.
Do you recommend I just keep playing the 10-minute games, or is something else better?
Yeah, I would say keep playing the 10-minute games. I think playing 10 minutes is probably the best. I mean, if you run out of time, that's always an issue. But I think playing 10 minutes is best. Do not play the blitz though. Don't play like 3-minute or 5-minute games, because those will not be helpful at all. Just keep playing like the 10-minute games and keep doing puzzles, and I mean, your rating will go up. Like, it should be at least like 300 to 400 points higher already. So
should I go through the analysis after each game, because that's what I have been doing?
Yeah, I think that's important. Let me see if there's something on openings as well. Let me click on this learn and openings tab. Let me see. Yeah, I was gonna say also maybe so you see how on the top left hand side of the of this you should see a learn tab, and then there should be openings.
Yep,
that's probably something that I would recommend, is maybe going there and just picking up a couple of these opening setups for what you want to do in the first like 5 moves of the game. I think that's probably really quite important for improvement. I think that's one of the main things
for each side.
Yeah, that's really important. What's that?
How many openings do you need for white and black?
Just with white, only 1 opening, because with white normally you open with the pawn in front of the king or the pawn in front of the queen. So really, I would say like one opening with white, and then with black normally you need to have a reply to the pawn in front of the king and the pawn in front of the queen. So for example, you see how it says 1 e4? That's the pawn in front of the king.
Yep.
I would probably recommend, I'm trying to think what's most thematic, something like the Hikaru Khan defense, which you see this pawn to c6, or something moving the pawn in front of the king 2 squares. One of those moves would be what I recommend. Although actually, now that I think about it, you could also play, there's the Scandinavian opening, Scandinavian defense as well, which actually is a really good opening too. It's very theme based, where you play a certain sequence and development of moves at the start of the game. So that I would probably recommend the Hikaru Khan defense or the Scandinavian.
Okay.
And then like you'll see, like if you scroll down, you'll see there's also 1 d4, which is the pawn in front of the queen.
So you need 1 defense for both of those openings, and then just 1 opening on white?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
I'd probably recommend against, like, if they push the pawn in front of the queen. I would say like the Queen's Gambit is a pretty good opening setup. Yeah, that's what I would recommend. I would recommend that. I think that's the most stable, is the Queen's Gambit. So I'd recommend learning a little bit of that, and then just,
that's an offensive one though, right?
No, because it's called the Queen's Gambit, but the reason it's called that is because black has the option of capturing a pawn and accepting the gambit, or declining the gambit. If black declines the gambit, then it's generally a very, very normal kind of developing game. It isn't super aggressive. If you accept the gambit, then it becomes very, very aggressive very quickly.
Oh, I see. And then what kind of opening should I do for? I mean, I've been doing e4, but I'm just doing random moves afterwards. So
yeah, I mean,
there's certain opening on white I should learn.
I think against e4, most players who are newer to the game, they're probably responding by pushing the pawn in front of their king as well, I would assume.
Yeah, I see that a lot. Yeah.
So I'd probably recommend like there's what's called the Italian game. That's one thing. If you want to be aggressive and not to stick to themes, but there's also the Danish Gambit, which you could play as well, which is very, very aggressive. But probably the Italian game is what I would recommend.
Okay.
So yeah, that's, I mean, I think that's important, but mainly the most important thing, since you have a pretty good grasp of basic concepts, is doing puzzles and playing as much as you can.
Yeah, I have a hard time finding those kind of attacking tactics in the game.
Right, and that's why, like, when you do more puzzles and you see it more and more, it becomes more ingrained. You start seeing those things because you've done so many of the puzzles, and it just becomes natural. And that's why, like, the pattern recognition is really important for something like chess.
How should a beginner like me balance kind of playing the game, doing puzzles, doing drills, studying openings?
I think openings
weaknesses
matter. Openings matter the least, I would say. I think puzzles and playing are by far and away the most important things. Even the drills can be important, but I think once you have those basic checkmating patterns down, it's about understanding like the ways that you can create checkmate patterns, like battery, for example, with a queen and a bishop on a diagonal, or like a back rank checkmate, or like a discovered attack. These I think are really important, but they're sort of they're in the puzzles. They're not like specific drills. Like the drills that you do, like the queen checkmate, once you learn those, you will know those forever. It's just one of those things you won't forget. So those are just for some forced sequences, but I think like the puzzles are puzzles and playing, probably I would say like roughly 50-50 is what I would suggest.
Okay,
so,
thanks,
yeah.
That's really helpful.
Yeah, no problem, that's good. All right, so I think you're probably fried from that. That's quite a bit.
A little bit, yeah. It's a lot of thinking, but it's really fun. It's been really fun. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we should do it again sometime, and hopefully you can like play in a tournament possibly down the road.
Can you play online tournaments, or
there's maybe a certain event called PogChamps happening in a couple months.
Oh, yeah,
maybe
we'll be in season, so I probably won't be able to play as much as a lot of other people.
Yeah.
But
yeah, if there's
I'm gonna try to still squeeze a little bit of time in for chess every day, maybe.
Yeah,
if I can.
Yeah, if there's ever an opportunity, that would be great. But I hope you enjoy the game first and foremost. And it was fun doing this.
It's super fun. Yeah.
Right. All right.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and good luck. And I'm sure I'll see you around the facility. And good luck with all the coaching and everything with League.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it was nice to finally talk to you. I've seen you going between your streaming room and the bathroom a few times when I'm at the facility, but I haven't really had a chance to catch you and talk. So
that's great. Yeah.
I hope there were some other beginners in the stream who also got to learn some things. It wasn't just me.
Yeah, but, I think people always learn something from these collaborations, and yeah, I think it was a lot of fun. So I enjoyed it. And hope you did too.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
All right. Have a good one.
Yeah. Take care. Have a good day and happy holidays.
Yeah. You too.